Thank you, Dave. So, Dave's given me the title or topic of integrity. And integrity is something we hear all the time, and we kind of know what it looks like when we see it. But so integrity means doing what is right. So as opposed to doing what is not right. And just the world that we live in often takes shortcuts. So I hear sometimes that they say the end justifies the means. It's become an acceptable saying. So when it comes to having goals or striving for success, people will keep the end goal in mind, and how we get there really doesn't matter, or that's being ignored. And you know that becomes like a common thing, but that's not integrity. And also with access to those goals, they say success will come and go, but integrity lasts forever. So it's about integrity is about doing what is right. I remember a year or two ago sitting at the hospital, looking out the window and looking down on the road that goes that wedges in between the hospital, and there's a pedestrian crossing there, and it's got red lights on it. And I was just watching there for not hours, but a long time. But it's interesting to see the number of people that ignored the red light and walked across anyway. So some of us would say, well, that's okay if there's no cars coming. But others of us, we can't actually walk across a road if there's a red light, even though there's no cars. So it's that idea, what's right and what is wrong. So it's interesting. I'm not going to give the right answer to that one because we might not agree on that. So integrity has the idea of something that's complete. So something that's complete is something that you can't improve on. So that the best example is God's creation has integrity because you can't improve on it. It's perfect. It's done. I grabbed a piece of wood this morning from the garage. So if I think this is reamers. Yeah, not sure, but it's nice native timber. If I cut this and we had a look inside of that fresh cut, what would you see? What do you think you would see? Wood. Yeah, probably wood. So integrity is the same inside out, or from inside out. It's the same thing. I guess if you dug a hole in a sand pit, you would expect to find sand all the way down. It's the same all the way through. So integrity in wood. You could talk about an old house having integrity. When I think of an old house, I obviously think of Monavale Homestead, the old building there, and in my mind, it has integrity. It's solid. It's made really well. It's lasted over 100 years already, and it really hasn't moved much. So that the house has integrity. There's a place in Deuteronomy 12:8, and so we're in the desert. And Moses, it's Moses that does a lot of speaking in Deuteronomy. And so he's been instructing the people how to live in the land when they get there. So he's setting up rules and regulations and describing how they are to live when they come into the promised land, because God wants it what was God's point of the whole exercise was to make them a people that were different from all the other nations. So that was the aim of it. So Moses said in Deuteronomy 12:8, he says, "You shall not at all do as you are doing here today, where every man is doing what is right in his own eyes." So obviously they are not quite getting it in the desert, but Moses is pleading with them that when they get into the country, into the promised land, that they will do what is right, because now they're not doing what is right, so because they're doing what is right in their own eyes. So it's the idea that we often think that, yeah, I'm right. So that's before they got in there. Then they pull out another verse from Judges. Judges, and this is the last verse of the book of Judges, so it's 21-25. And you kind of think you've got Joshua. The book of Joshua is where they move into the land and they take over the land. And then you think the book after that should really be a book of how good the promised land is. But if we read Judges, that's not the case. And which is sad, but even the last verse of the book says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So that's summarizing the book of Judges pretty well. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It's a sad way to end the book, but that's what it does. So what happens when everyone does what is right in their own eyes? Because the problem is that I think I'm right in a lot of cases, and we all think that we have the right answer to whatever it is. So determining what is right and what is not is really not up to us to decide, because God sets the standard, and as we read through scriptures and aligning up our life to his guidelines, the life that God set out and the life that Jesus exemplified, that gives us a good indication of what is right. So with integrity assumes that there's a right and a wrong. We'll look at some characters in the Bible. So the first one is Joseph. Joseph is one of my favorite characters when it comes to integrity. So in chapter 39 of Genesis, we meet Joseph, and Joseph, one of 12 brothers, was not liked by the brothers, but he was liked by the dad, and it created some conflicts in the home. And in the end, Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt. And let's read. So Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt, into a place called Potiphar's. So he's in Potiphar's house and he's a slave there. He would have become one of many. There could have been hundreds of servants in this household. And Joseph, he arrived there as one of many. So he would have started at the bottom of the ladder. And all the servants, I can picture this, that they would all have started at the bottom. They would have done what they were asked of. And the other servants, they would have worked to probably please their masters. But Joseph rose way above that. Somehow, we don't really know how he did that, but obviously he'd done so well that he was put in a high position in the household, and to a point where Joseph was in charge of the master's house, and he would have lived lived a life surrounded by much pleasure, and this is where his integrity had to be proven. So I think God tested him here. So in 39, verse 7 till 10, we'll read 7 to 10. I'll start partway in 6. It says in my Bible, now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph. Did I say Genesis 39? Genesis 39, 7 and 9. Verse 8 says, but he refused. So, let me go back to 7. After a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But Joseph refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself about anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing as sin against God? So in case of Joseph, there was obviously a sex object in the house. Morals would have been much like today. And we see in verse, I didn't read verse 10. In verse 10 it said, though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. So the woman was pleading with Joseph every day to come and sleep with him. But because Joseph had made up his mind, she would never be an issue on even temptation to Joseph. So because Joseph was busy doing all his work as if working for God and doing everything at the highest standard. So for Joseph, what mattered was not the circumstances, it was not the events of his life, but it was his response to them. So you have to make up your mind long before any temptation rises, what you're going to do and say when the pressure is on. My thinking is, it's the way you deal with an issue under pressure is very much determined of what's in your heart. So what is in my heart? Is it self that rules, or is it Christ that rules my heart? And that's going to determine how we react when the pressure is on. Joseph could easily have said yes to his master's wife, but he said no, none of that. It was up to Joseph to say no, because I think we know the devil can't make me sin. He can only tempt me. And then it's up to me to say no to what is not right. Verse 9 says, I'll read that one again. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has my master kept anything back from me except you, because you're his wife. And then this part here. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So Joseph was living not just among these people, but he was living in the audience of one. He was living before God, and he knew that every action that he did, if it was a poor decision, he was actually sinning against God. I think that's quite remarkable of him. If Joseph had given in to this temptation, we would never have heard of him. But he stood the test. And as long as he did his job, he could have everything he wanted except his wife. And that is the one thing he couldn't have. He had an awareness of God. He knew that God sets the standard for right and wrong. And the wrong choice is a sin against God. There's a lot more in the story of Joseph, but we know he after this he's been falsely accused. But it says further on in chapter 40, there's a couple of places where it says the Lord was with Joseph in prison, and later on it says the Lord was with him in whatever he did. So the Lord made it prosper. So obviously God honored Joseph for standing up for his right choices. And I wonder, how can someone be in such a favor with God and with man as Joseph? Because he, in the time in Egypt, he was, I don't know how many years he was there, but within the first half of that time, he rose to be in charge of all of Potiphar's house. Then he ended up in prison, and then in prison he rose to be the second in charge of all the prison, and then he rose to be the second in charge of Egypt and right under Pharaoh, and that within a very short time, just because the man was a man of integrity. I think that is pretty amazing. There's a quote here, I can't remember where I got it from, but it says, integrity is doing what is right. It is believing or to have the faith to look into the future and to believe that in the end it will be better to have done right and to wait on the blessing of God. And it just fits so well with Joseph to believe that in the end it will be better to do what is right and to wait on the blessings of God, which is exactly what happened there. But we often tend to steam ahead. There's other people. There's the one in the book of Daniel. Remember the four guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They were told to bow down to the golden image, and if you don't, you'll lose your life. These three guys determined that they were not going to bow down to the image when the music played. And we could sort of think, well, couldn't they just have done it quietly and got away with it? But they couldn't, because their integrity was at stake. If they had bowed down, those guys would have no integrity left. So doing what is right, they were honored for that because God saved them out of the furnace. Another one is Daniel. He was definitely a man of integrity too. He was, in chapter 6, he was 80 years old. He had been loyal to 3 world leaders. And I might read that. So Daniel chapter 6, verse 3 to 5. Daniel 6, 3 to 5. Now Daniel was so distinguished himself among the administrators of the satraps by his exceptional quality that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct to government affairs, but they were unable to find so. They could find no corruption in him because he was a trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Isn't that an amazing thing to have someone say about you? These are not his friends saying it. These are his enemies saying, we can find no corruption in him because he is trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. I think that's incredible. Your enemies cannot find anything. When I think of MPs in New Zealand, you often on the news see them bickering and pulling out faults and mistakes they've done in the past, but these guys could not find anything wrong with Daniel. So I thought that was pretty cool. there's a verse in Proverbs which says, this is 11, chapter 11, verse 1, dishonest scales is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Dishonest scales is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Yes. That can stand on its own here. So for Joseph, Daniel, and even Job, you couldn't find fault in their lifestyle, in what they said or in what they did. And we'll just, I'll look at some verses about Job that I think describe him very well too. So in Job 27, Job 27, 4 and 5, this is Job speaking to his friend, and if you know the book of Job, you know that Job had 3 friends, and they gave him lots of advice. And when you read it, it looks like good advice. It's like, oh, it looks fairly good. But later on we realized that it wasn't good. When God started speaking, it was like, well, that advice was actually terrible. And I often think of that in my own life, and you often hear about it. You know, we want some good advice, so we go and ask a trustworthy person for their advice. But they might think that they are right as well as someone else think they are right, and I have my own opinion. So I can't figure out what is right. So the whole idea of seeking advice, there's probably a place for it, but we've got to be careful for that, because is it right according to God or to Scripture? So in 27 of Job 4 and 5, Job is speaking, my lips will not say anything wicked, and my tongue will not utter lies. I will never admit that you are right till I die. I will never deny my integrity. So it sounds a little bit arrogant when you just pull out a verse like that, or even that the guy might be bragging. But I'll pull out a couple of other verses in the beginning of Job. So the beginning of Job is this scene in heaven where God is and the angels are coming in, and Job and the devil is coming in, and God says to Satan in Job chapter 1 verse 8, Job 1:8, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth. He is blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. So this is God describing Job, and he's using some amazing words. He's blameless, he's upright in everything he does. So this is the first time that Satan comes in, and now Satan goes out and he takes everything from Job, and then chapter 2 verse 3, Satan comes in again, and the Lord says in 2:3, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you have incited me against him to destroy him without a reason. So Job have lost literally everything. And the only thing that was left was his integrity. Because God says he still holds fast in his integrity. That's all he's got. He's got his faith in God, his trust in God, and his integrity. Amazing. Amazing. So Job was like Joseph. They had done nothing wrong to deserve the evil that was happening to them. Still, they glorified God in all that they said and did. And again, it's a picture of Jesus. And it's also this idea of living in the audience of one. And this idea that the bad things that are happening to me, this idea that it is better to have done what is right and to wait on the blessing of God. It is better to do what is right and wait for the blessings of God. I've sort of over the years, I've sort of picked up on just little things in my own life that I didn't think was quite right. So a couple of them is sometimes I would say about a job, I would say, that'll do. Or I would say, that's good enough. Or even go to say, that's fine, because no one will be able to see it. When it's all finished, you can't actually see what's behind there, or it's sort of, so I'm thinking as an electrician here, so we'll put the cables in the house, and when the house is finished and painted, no one's going to see it, but there's some guidelines for how you run your cables, so that there's a proper way of doing it, or even if you bury things in the ground, no one's going to see it. It's going to have dirt and concrete above it, so no one can see it. But there's, if you say that's good enough, it's like, that's not right, or that will do. It sort of has a bad ring to it. And I remember a few times on a work afternoon at Kaipaki, you work with some students and they don't quite have the skills, and then at the end of it, you say, oh, that will do. And it sort of has that ring that, no, we could do better, but that will do. So God sort of changed my view on some of those. So I've got to start changing my way of talking about Kaipaki, because I don't actually work there anymore. So it's sort of, when I used to work there, that was the first time I've done that. When I used to, sometimes I would see a piece of rubbish on the ground, and you register it and move on, and then I was thinking as I was moving on, thinking that piece of rubbish shouldn't be there. I said, I'm not going to think about it, and you keep moving, and it just won't go away. So you have to walk back, pick up the rubbish, put it in the bin, and then you move on. And it's little things like that. I remember one lady saying, because her husband had the same thing, rubbish shouldn't be there, so let's deal with it. And when she went for a walk with her husband in the park, he would pick up rubbish, and she was so embarrassed about it. But in his mind, that was right to him. So I'm going to head off for that. Okay, so Jesus, obviously we can't talk about this without talking about Jesus. So Jesus was perfect, so it's a little bit hard to talk about integrity when it comes to him, because that's just what he was. But there is an interesting passage in Mark chapter 12, Mark 12, 13 and 14, where Jesus is recognized for his integrity by the religious leaders. And I think that's interesting, because these guys, they didn't believe in Jesus, that he was the Son of God or the Messiah or any of that, but still they recognized him for his integrity. So in 12:13 it says that later they sent some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by men, because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? But Jesus knew the hypocrisy and said, why are you trying to trap me? He asked. Okay, so these guys came to him and in the text we see that they even though they didn't believe in him, they acknowledged that he had integrity, but he calls them hypocrites, but never mind. They said, you are a man of integrity, and then they explained, if you look at the passage, they explained what he meant, or what they meant. Yes, they teach, so we know you're a man of integrity, and then they explained that you aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are, but teach the way of God in accordance to the truth. That's big words. I know they were trying to twist things, but they recognized it, and they used words to describe it. Even though they didn't believe in who he was at all. A man of integrity, someone who is not swayed by others and pay no attention to who they are. So even though they didn't mean what they said, they couldn't have been more right in their statement of Jesus. What they said about Jesus was absolutely true. He was and he is the perfect example of human integrity. He didn't let other people sway him. I think that's a good word, sway him, in what he said or did. He didn't conform to their taste, or he didn't conform to their social standings or even their education, but Jesus taught the way of God in truth. He taught the way of God in truth. He kept God foremost in mind, and because of that, what he said and what he did could be relied on. So as followers of Jesus, we should strive to be like him in this respect. We should be people who can people whose words and action can be counted on as being true and right. But yeah, how can we be like that? In verse 14 it says we must refuse to pay attention to who people are. So it's not a matter of being insensitive or disrespectful to them, but it is refusing to let who they are, their position of influence, shape the way we live. So in this world, we easily are being influenced by the people around me all the time. Actually, it's easy to be influenced, but we must rise above others in order to live life of integrity. And I was thinking about this. Sometimes there's something in me that is longing for other people's approval. And sometimes I'm tempted to adjust my words just to gain a little bit of favor from other people. I don't know if you can relate to that. I sometimes catch myself after I've said something and I realize that what I just said was only that they might look better in their eyes, that I might look a little bit better in their eyes. And it's like, and you know, every time you catch yourself, it's like, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I did that. So the only way to combat this is to have that deep longing for truth. I just long for truth. And I have this desire to glorify Jesus in my own life. You know, that's the only way to get out of it. So that, pulling out Joseph here, so that when we are tempted, we can say like Joseph, how can I do this wickedness and sin against God? That was his answer to Potiphar's wife. He was not concerned about doing wrong, but he was concerned about sinning against God. So this idea of integrity, it's something we all have, but it's something that has to be exercised. Because as a believer, you know, I became a Christian over 25 years ago now. Pretty excited. I had sort of one of those. That day is when I gave my life to the Lord, because God intervened in my life. I knew there was something missing in me, and I was thinking, I was ticking the boxes. I was trying to tick the boxes for being a good Christian. But one day God revealed to me that there was nothing good in me. I was just a rotten sinner. And that was the day that I gave my life to Christ. That was the day when I understood why Jesus had to die for me. It was to take away the punishment for my sins so that I could have fellowship with God and Jesus again. And on that day too, I know that Jesus entered my life, the Holy Spirit that came into me, and I was united with them before God. So I realized too that, you know, the life of integrity that Jesus lived, there's no way I can do that. There's no way I can imitate that. But because he is here, and when I allow him to live his life through me, that's when Jesus will be glorified in my life. And also, keeping this in mind, that it's not me living, but Christ living in me, that will also help me to not be so easily swayed by other people, and also to refuse to pay attention to who they are and what they think of me, because it really doesn't matter what they think of me. It's what God thinks of me. And if God can look on me, and if I, by doing what is right, can put a smile on God's face, well, it doesn't matter what anyone else had to say. I'll wind this down. Just a couple of things on integrity here that I'll come across. Integrity brings a contentment to life. Integrity helps me sleep well at night. Integrity is quiet. It doesn't make a noise. Integrity always tells the truth. So remember the verse in the last verse of the book of Judges said, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So the problem in the book of Judges was that they had rejected God as Lord and King over their life. And each one had chosen to be his own king. They put themselves on the throne instead of putting God on the throne, which meant that they had no direction in life. They were just doing what seemed right to themselves or